My dad lost his father's beloved auto shop to my aunt's shady new business partner, so I started investigating what really happened the day Grandpa signed his will. But the truth I uncovered ended up costing me everything I cared about. There are moments in life that rip through you like a gunshot, leaving behind only the wreckage of what you once knew. For me, that moment hit when I was 17, when a promise meant everything, and an act of pure, calculated betrayal turned my entire world to ash. Grandpa Joe died on a Tuesday morning. 1 second, he was under a Honda, the familiar scent of oil and gasoline in the air, teaching me to diagnose engine problems by just listening. The next, he was on the cold concrete, silent, gone. A massive stroke. We buried him in the rain, and all I could think about was the gleam in his eye last week when he promised me his 1967 Mustang for my 18th birthday. Then came the will reading. I watched my dad's face crumple from confusion to pure devastation as the lawyer announced everything. The shop, our home, Grandpa's entire life's work was left to Aunt Michelle. Everything. For 20 years, my dad had bled for that shop. 20 years of opening before dawn, closing after dark, keeping us afloat when the recession nearly took every small business on our street. And Aunt Michelle? She'd been in California for a decade, only to suddenly reappear 6 months ago, claiming she was here to help with Dad's health. The very next morning, she rolled up in her sleek Tesla with Oscar, her business partner, who sauntered through our shop like he already owned the damn place. Within minutes, he was spouting jargon about hemorrhaging money and restructuring, while moving his fancy stuff into Grandpa's office. My dad, a man who built this place with his own 2 hands, was demoted to senior mechanic in his own family's shop. Oscar's first move, firing Carlos, a man who'd been with us for 20 years, all in the name of cutting overhead. Then came the eviction notice for our apartment right above the shop, citing code violations we'd never even heard of. 60 days. That's all we had to get out. Mom started working double shifts at the hospital, her exhaustion etched onto her face, while Dad's shoulders seemed to slump a little lower every single day. I quit basketball, the one thing I loved, to work at the shop, unpaid, watching Oscar bring in new mechanics who overcharged our regulars and brazenly pocketed cash. One day, Mrs. Henderson, a sweet lady who'd been coming to Grandpa for decades, came to me crying. Oscar had tried to charge her $2,000 for a new transmission, when all she needed was a fluid change. I showed my parents the receipts, concrete proof that Oscar was stealing from the very people Grandpa had dedicated his life to serving. But they were too tired, too broken to fight. Every night I'd text Grandpa's old number sending updates about how Oscar was systematically destroying everything we'd built. Dad still showed up at 5 a.m., but only to drink coffee alone in the empty shop, a silent vigil, refusing to let Oscar sell Grandpa's precious tools. Under a tarp in the back, the Mustang sat, the one Dad and I had been restoring together. It was the only time I saw a flicker of life in his eyes anymore. When summer rolled around, I tentatively asked if we could use the shoplift one Saturday to install the exhaust. For the first time in months, Dad actually smiled, the real one. But that small glimmer of hope was instantly snuffed out. Oscar announced he'd found a buyer for the Mustang. $30,000, he said, would keep us operational another quarter. He casually added that the car was registered to the business, not personal property. I begged Dad to fight, but he was hammered, utterly broken. He just screamed that Grandpa made promises he couldn't keep and left us with nothing. That night, I overheard Oscar on the phone, telling someone to move the car before the kid does. Something stupid. At 4 a.m., I crept back to the shop, my heart pounding, a burning certainty that I was taking what was rightfully mine. The Mustang started on the second try, just like Grandpa taught me. But Oscar's BMW was blocking the gate. He called it theft. I called it taking my inheritance. The police came. Oscar filed a report. But then, with a sickeningly smug look, said he wouldn't press charges if I just stayed away. The look on Dad's face when he saw me in handcuffs. It broke something between us that I wasn't sure could ever be fixed. At home, the truth finally spilled out. Dad knew Oscar was stealing, but he needed the job. Mom sobbed, saying we were losing the apartment anyway. I stormed out, heading to Grandpa's empty house, still in escrow. I started tearing through his office, desperate for anything about the car's ownership. That's when I found his appointment calendar. Sandwiched between doctor visits were weekly meetings with S&D, starting 6 months before he died. In the IC, margins, his shaky handwriting, confused after new pills, don't sign anything. Another note, security camera and bird clock. Check recordings. The ugly cuckoo clock. Michelle had wanted to trash it, but Dad had insisted on keeping it. My friend Jake helped me extract a tiny hidden camera at 3 a.m. The SD card was corrupted, but we managed to salvage some grainy footage. It showed Grandpa in his office looking utterly lost, while Michelle and Oscar stood over him. Michelle, with her sweet smile, kept saying, "Sign here, Dad. It's for your medication schedule." Grandpa, confused, kept asking, "Where's Tony? What is this?" And Oscar, ever so smooth, just replied, "Tony needs you to sign these papers." After Grandpa signed, they both grinned. Everything clicked into place. The most updated will, the one that disinherited my dad, was signed when Grandpa clearly wasn't coherent. The one before it, the one leaving everything to Dad, that was the real one. My hands shook, a cold dread washing over me. This was far from over, and I had no idea if this grainy footage would even be enough. I stared at the laptop, replaying. The footage for the 100th time. The timestamp, 3:47 p.m., 3 weeks before Grandpa died. Oscar's hand on Grandpa's shoulder looked gentle to anyone who didn't know better. But I could see the subtle pressure, his fingers pressing down, keeping Grandpa in place while Michelle slid papers across the desk. The next morning, the shop's routine started like clockwork. Oscar arrived early at 6:30, fumbling with his keys, glancing around, paranoid. He went straight to Grandpa's office, then the break room, then back again. His movements were jerky, agitated. He checked the cuckoo clock twice, running his hands along its edges. The third time, he ripped it off the wall. I watched from across the street as he discovered the empty SD card slot. His face morphed from confusion to pure, unadulterated rage. He hurled the clock against the wall, shattering its wooden frame. 2 mechanics rushed in, but Oscar waved them off, his hands visibly shaking as he swept up the pieces. By 8 a.m., I was at the diner where Grandpa ate breakfast every morning for 30 years. The red vinyl booth still smelled faintly of his Old Spice aftershave. Michelle walked in, designer sunglasses hiding her eyes, and ordered black coffee. I slid into the seat across from her. She looked up, annoyed, but I just laid Grandpa's appointment calendar between us. Her eyes flicked to the entries about medication schedules, about his confused periods. When I mentioned his shaky handwriting documenting his own confusion, her hand instinctively went to her throat, fingers touching her gold necklace, the same nervous gesture Grandpa used to make when he was uncomfortable. I started explaining about the footage, the signatures, the timeline. My words came out jumbled, too fast. Tori, the waitress who'd served Grandpa his eggs over easy for decades, walked by. She heard me babbling about hidden cameras and forged documents. Her eyebrows shot up. She looked at Michelle with sympathy, like I was some crazy conspiracy theorist harassing a grieving daughter. Michelle's voice remained calm, measured. She told Tori I was just having a hard time with Grandpa's death, that grief made people see things that weren't there. Tori patted my shoulder and offered me free pie, the kind Grandpa used to order. I wanted to scream that I wasn't crazy, but the more I talked, the more unhinged I sounded. My phone buzzed. Jake's mom, she needed Oscar to sign off on an insurance claim for Jake's accident last month, a lift malfunction that broke his wrist. $20,000 she desperately needed for Jake's college fund. Without Oscar's signature, no settlement. I met her in the shop parking lot, her stress lines deeper than I remembered. The laptop with the footage was in my backpack, ready to show her. But then she started talking about Jake's scholarship applications, how this insurance money was their only shot at his engineering program. Oscar appeared at the door, waving her inside with a friendly smile, talking about how quickly he could process the claim, how he understood wanting the best for your kids. Then he looked at me, and his message was crystal clear. Don't you dare. Jake's mom glanced between us, sensing the tension. I could have shown her the footage right then, proved Oscar was a fraud. But that would mean she'd have to choose sides, and choosing my side meant risking her son's entire future. My hand stayed on the closed laptop. She went inside with Oscar. Through the window, I watched him hand her papers, his gestures expansive and reassuring. When she came out, she hugged me but wouldn't meet my eyes. Later, Jake texted that his mom said I should maybe take a break from the shop drama, focus on school. Oscar's next move was brilliant, insidious. He started making rounds to local business owners, the ones who'd known our family for years. He brought coffee and donuts to the hardware store, helped the florist with her computer, offered oil change discounts to the barber. Every single conversation included concerned mentions of his troubled nephew, struggling with grief, making wild accusations, breaking into buildings. Within a week, I felt the shift. The pharmacy clerk who used to joke with me went silent. The grocery store manager followed me through the aisles. Even the librarian who'd helped me research legal documents started making excuses when I asked to use the computers. I was an outcast. Then everything hit at once. Mom called from the hospital parking lot. Her car wouldn't start, and she couldn't miss her shift. Dad was at the shop, but Oscar had changed all the computer passwords overnight. He couldn't access scheduling, print invoices, or even clock in. My phone service got cut off for non-payment, even though I knew Dad had paid the bill. I had to take Mom's car to Nietzsche's Auto across town, the only place that would look at it without Oscar's approval. While Nietzsche worked, he made small talk, casually mentioning how Oscar had stopped by last week, worried about how the family business was being run into the ground. Nietzsche repeated Oscar's exact words: "Family drama destroying good businesses." The repair cost $300 we didn't have. The town council meeting was Oscar's masterpiece. He stood at the podium, talking about the shop's future, about preserving Grandpa's legacy, about difficult decisions. Halfway through his speech, his voice cracked, his hands started shaking. He gripped the podium, his breathing shallow, a genuine, undeniable panic attack in front of 30 community leaders. The council president helped him to a chair. Someone brought water. Oscar kept apologizing, saying the stress of trying to save the family business while dealing with family members who fought him at every turn was overwhelming. He mentioned my break-in attempt, my accusations, my refusal to let Grandpa rest in peace. Every council member looked at him with sympathy. The fire chief's wife rubbed his shoulder. The bank president promised to help. Even my cousin Emma started defending Oscar at family dinners. He'd bought her entire box of school fundraiser candy bars, remembered her favorite flavor, helped with her science project. She couldn't understand why I was being so mean to someone who was trying so hard to help our family. I found a sliver of hope in the pharmacy records. Insurance regulations required detailed documentation of prescription changes, especially for elderly patients with cognitive issues. The portal showed Grandpa's medication history, including the new pills that caused confusion. But Oscar was already transferring all the insurance accounts. The pharmacy tech whispered, "You have maybe 48 hours before access is revoked." At 2 a.m., I went to Grandpa's house. The realtor had started showing it, but I still had my key. I needed the insurance papers from his filing cabinet. The house felt different, smaller. His coffee mug still sat by the sink, his reading glasses on the kitchen counter. I was in his study when headlights swept across the window. The realtor's car pulled up with potential buyers in the middle of the night. She found me with papers spread across the floor. "Special showing," she explained, but her flashlight caught me and the buyers backed away as she called the police. The officers recognized me from the shop incident. The realtor described finding me breaking into a property that was no longer mine, going through private documents using words like unstable and harassment. One buyer mentioned feeling unsafe. My credibility was completely shattered. The next morning, the bank manager called Dad. He needed Oscar's signature to access Grandpa's business accounts, outstanding debts, vendor payments, tax obligations. Without Oscar's cooperation, the accounts would be frozen. Dad had no choice but to ask Oscar nicely to play along. I hadn't slept in 3 days. The footage played on repeat. At breakfast, I knocked over the orange juice. At school, I walked into a door frame. Dad watched me with growing concern. He mentioned how I reminded him of himself after Grandma died, how he'd scared everyone, nearly lost custody of us kids because of his breakdown. The family group text became a minefield. Every message could be screenshotted, twisted, used against us. Oscar had started hinting about custody evaluations, about what was best for Emma, about stable environments. Mom stopped texting altogether. Dad only sent single-word responses. I tried calling Grandpa's doctor, but the receptionist recognized my name. She'd been briefed about my harassment of the family. When I insisted on leaving a message, she said any further attempts would be reported. The medical evidence I needed was locked behind a wall of Oscar's manipulation. Oscar's next play, Grandpa's veteran benefits. Using the power of attorney, signed during a confused period, Oscar filed paperwork to become the benefits administrator. The VA system moved slowly, but once processed, the family would lose access to Grandpa's medical insurance and disability payments. 6 to 8 weeks, the website said. A ticking clock. I couldn't stop. My exhaustion caused mistakes. I rear-ended a car in the school parking lot. Just a tap, but enough to leave a mark. The other driver was understanding until they heard my name. They'd heard about the troubled kid harassing his grieving aunt. They insisted on a full police report, mentioned feeling unsafe, suggested I might be on substances. Jake's parents made their position clear. They believed me, they said, but they couldn't risk Jake's future. Oscar had already threatened to name Jake as an accessory to the attempted theft. One word from Oscar and Jake's college applications would include a criminal record. They asked me to understand. I did, but understanding didn't make it hurt less. The coffee shop where I used to study became hostile territory. The owner, Cole, avoided eye contact. Other customers whispered. Cole finally admitted Oscar had told everyone I was having a mental health crisis, that the family was trying to get me help, that enabling my delusions would only make things worse. Oscar's lies started catching up with him in small ways. He claimed he'd been at the shop all day when Grandpa signed the will, but gas station surveillance footage showed him leaving for 3 hours. The timestamp contradicted his story, but when I tried to point this out, it just looked like I was stalking him. My old basketball coach needed new equipment. Oscar had offered to sponsor them. Coach found me after practice, explained how 28 kids were counting on this sponsorship. He asked me to consider letting the legal stuff play out quietly without making waves. I discovered Oscar had lied about invoice dates, claiming certain repairs happened before Grandpa's death when they'd actually happened after. But proving this meant admitting I'd sometimes borrowed $5 or $10 from the register for lunch, always planning to pay it back. Being technically right about Oscar made my own minor ethical lapses seem hypocritical. When I finally found a receipt proving Oscar had forged Grandpa's signature on a work order, I felt a moment of pure relief. I posted about it on social media, just a quick update that I'd found evidence. Within hours, Oscar's lawyer had screenshots. They painted me as someone celebrating while the family grieved, taking joy in conflict instead of seeking healing. The battle lines were drawn. Oscar and I stared at each other across the shop parking lot, both realizing there was no backing down. He'd committed too deeply to his story of the concerned caretaker. I'd committed too deeply to exposing him. One of us would be destroyed completely. That night, I sat in Grandpa's Mustang, running my hands over the steering wheel he'd touched 1,000 times. The shop was quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Somewhere in this building was more evidence, more proof. But every move I made pushed away another ally, burned another bridge. Tomorrow would bring new battles. Oscar would find fresh ways to isolate me. I'd have to choose between protecting the people I cared about and pursuing justice. The 48-hour window on the pharmacy records was closing. The VA paperwork was processing. The community had chosen sides. But I had the footage, grainy and corrupted, but real. Grandpa's confused voice asking for his son, Michelle's lies about medication schedules, Oscar's manipulation captured, in pixels and timestamps. It might not be enough for a court, but it was enough for me to keep fighting. The Mustang's engine turned over on the first try, just like Grandpa had taught me. I let it idle, feeling the vibration through the seat, remembering his hands guiding mine on the gear shift. Whatever came next, I'd face it for him, for Dad, for all of us. The war with Oscar was just beginning. Then, Oscar started dating Samantha, the mother of my ex-girlfriend. They'd met at the vintage car show downtown, where Oscar was already displaying the Mustang like it was his own. Samantha owned a '69 Camaro she'd restored herself. Oscar quoted Grandpa's favorite car restoration show while examining her engine work, using phrases Grandpa always said about respecting the original manufacturer's vision. Samantha's eyes lit up. Within 2 weeks, they were having dinner together, and I watched from across the street as Oscar charmed her with stories about helping preserve Grandpa's automotive legacy. The confusion started affecting both Oscar and me. We gave Dad completely different accounts of the same conversation about shop inventory. Oscar swore I'd threatened to burn down the shop if he sold the Mustang. I remembered warning him that selling Grandpa's dream would destroy what was left of our family. Dad's exhausted face showed he didn't know who to believe anymore. The stress and sleepless nights had warped both our memories until neither of us could separate truth from paranoia. My phone held old text messages I'd sent friends complaining about working at the shop. Messages calling Grandpa controlling when he made me reorganize the tool cabinet for the 3rd time. Texts about how impossible he was when he insisted on checking my work. Oscar had somehow gotten screenshots and included them in a character witness statement. My own teenage frustration, ripped out of context, now painted me as an ungrateful grandchild who'd resented the man I was claiming to defend. The Hendersons lived across from the shop. Their 8-year-old daughter, Katie, had scraped her knee falling off her bike last week. Oscar had rushed out with the first aid kit, cleaned the wound gently, even gave her a lollipop. While bandaging her knee, he'd mentioned how sad it was that Grandpa had been so confused in his final months. Katie repeated this to me, her innocent voice explaining how the nice man said Grandpa was really sick and didn't know what he was doing that day he signed the papers. The Hendersons had installed a Ring doorbell 6 months ago. The footage from the day Grandpa signed the will showed him looking lost in his own driveway, turning in circles like he couldn't remember where he'd parked. Then Oscar appeared, in frame, gently guiding Grandpa to his car, helping him into the passenger seat. To anyone watching, Oscar looked like a caring caregiver, helping a confused elderly man. The timestamp matched the afternoon the will was signed. Michelle filed for a restraining order, claiming I was stalking and harassing her. The family court mediator, a tired-looking woman who'd clearly seen too many family disputes, treated my accusations as typical teenage grief, manifesting as anger. She suggested grief counseling and supervised visits. When I tried explaining about the forged signatures and confused periods, she cut me off with practiced patience, recommending I speak with a therapist about processing loss in healthier ways. Grandpa had written all his passwords in a small notebook he kept in his toolbox for memory aid. I used them to access his business email before Oscar could delete everything. The browser history revealed desperate searches Grandpa had made in his final months: early dementia signs, how to protect assets from family. His email drafts contained half-finished messages to lawyers that were never sent, rambling concerns about his memory that trailed off mid-sentence. Oscar had been monitoring the computer remotely, watching Grandpa's decline in real time. Oscar's social media posts from the past year told a different story when read carefully. 6 months before Grandpa's death, Oscar had posted about new opportunities in the automotive industry. 4 months before, he'd shared articles about elder care and family businesses. 2 months before, he'd posted about difficult decisions and preparing for change. The breadcrumbs of his plan were scattered across Facebook, invisible until you knew what to look for. The school counselor pulled me out of class for mandatory grief counseling. During our session, I made the mistake of mentioning that I sometimes dreamed about confronting Oscar violently, about making him admit what he'd done. The counselor's face went carefully neutral as she explained she was required to report any statements about potential violence. My hypothetical dreams, born from frustration and exhaustion, were now documented as threatening behavior. I tried recording Oscar during one of our confrontations at the shop. My phone battery was at 12%, but I thought it would last. Oscar noticed the phone immediately. His entire demeanor shifted. He started speaking in concerned whispers, asking if I was okay, offering to get me help, mentioning how worried everyone was about me. My phone died just as he was saying he forgave me for all the trouble I'd caused. Without the first part of our conversation, the recording made me look like an unstable kid harassing a concerned relative. Emma's school pickup time created unexpected leverage for Oscar. Mom's double shifts meant she couldn't always get Emma. Dad was usually at the shop. Oscar started offering to help, presenting himself as the stable family member. Emma loved riding in his BMW, loved the expensive snacks he bought her, loved how he let her pick the music. Each ride was another brick in the wall between my family and the truth. Carlos had worked at the shop for 20 years before Oscar fired him. I tracked him down at the unemployment office, hoping he'd testify about Oscar's financial manipulation. But Carlos had his own problems. An anonymous complaint had been filed about his drinking, even though he'd been sober for 15 years. His unemployment benefits were under review. If he testified against Oscar and lost his benefits, his grandkids would go hungry. He looked me in the eyes and said he couldn't risk it, that he had to think of his family first. I discovered Oscar had moved into Grandpa's bedroom at the house. He'd convinced the realtor that staying there would help maintain the property. Oscar wore Grandpa's clothes, claiming they helped him feel close to the man who'd been like a father to him. The distinctive Old Spice aftershave Grandpa always wore now followed Oscar everywhere. It made my stomach turn, smelling that familiar scent on the man who'd destroyed everything. Oscar made me an offer through Dad. He'd let me into the shop one last time to say goodbye to Grandpa's tools, to sit in the Mustang, to take photos. All I had to do was publicly apologize for my accusations and stop pursuing the matter. He'd even let me keep some of Grandpa's personal tools. Dad begged me to consider it, said it might bring closure. I refused, and Oscar spun it as me, selfishly prolonging family trauma when everyone else just wanted to heal. The medical records I'd been trying to access revealed a more complex truth. Grandpa's files showed brief lucid periods between medication adjustments, windows where he seemed completely normal. But they also documented severe confusion during other periods, times when he didn't recognize his own reflection. The will had been signed during one of the documented confused periods, according to the pharmacy timestamps. But proving which mental state Grandpa was in at that exact moment seemed impossible. Both Oscar and I slowly realized the full picture. Grandpa had been hiding early dementia symptoms for over a year, too proud to burden the family. He'd been documenting his own decline in scattered notes and computer searches. His attempts to protect family assets had been desperate and disorganized, the efforts of a man fighting his own failing mind. What I'd seen as clear manipulation might have been Oscar taking advantage of genuine confusion. Or it might have been Grandpa's own erratic decisions during cognitive decline. The revelation that Grandpa had been genuinely impaired reframed everything. My proof of manipulation also revealed Grandpa's desperate attempts to maintain control, while his mind betrayed him. Every document I'd found could be interpreted two ways. Either Oscar had manipulated a confused old man, or Grandpa had made poor decisions during moments of clarity between confused periods. The truth was probably both, tangled together in ways no court could untangle. Dad faced an impossible choice when Michelle's lawyer threatened to pursue custody evaluation of Emma. If Dad supported my accusations against Michelle and Oscar, Michelle would claim he was an unfit parent, exposing Emma to conspiracy theories and family conflict. If he lost Emma after already losing the shop and Grandpa, it would destroy him completely. I watched him weigh his options, saw the exact moment he chose Emma's stability over pursuing justice. He limited my access to family resources, stopped letting me use his car, asked me to stop coming to family dinners. The betrayal stung, but it also taught me Oscar's methods. I started befriending Michelle's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, helping with her groceries and yard work. Mrs. Chen mentioned how nice it was to have helpful young people around, unlike that Oscar who only visited Michelle late at night and always parked around the corner. She'd noticed him carrying boxes out of Michelle's garage, loading them into his BMW when he thought no one was watching. Information gathered through kindness, just like Oscar would do. Grandpa's former nurse, Patricia, worked at the coffee shop after retiring. I struck up conversations about her career, sympathized about difficult patients, gradually worked around to asking about Grandpa. Patricia mentioned Oscar's frequent visits during Grandpa's final months, how he always showed up during the documented confused periods. She found it strange how Oscar seemed to have the medication schedule memorized, arriving just as Grandpa would be most impaired. Patricia had mentioned it to the doctor once, but nothing came of it. The medical records were my last hope before Oscar completed the insurance transfer. Patricia still had emergency access codes Grandpa had shared for the shop. She downloaded 6 months of medical history before Oscar realized the breach and had the access revoked. The record showed a clear pattern of Oscar's visits correlating with confusion episodes, but also revealed Grandpa had been hiding symptoms much longer than anyone knew. Grandpa's ex-business partner from the 1990s, Robert, reached out after hearing about the family conflict. Robert had kept tabs on Oscar, knew about an elderly client in Sacramento who'd signed over power of attorney to Oscar under suspicious circumstances. That case had been dropped when the client's family decided pursuing it would be too expensive and traumatic. Robert had documents suggesting a pattern, but warned me that Oscar was skilled at staying just within legal boundaries. The investigation consumed my life. I missed Emma's emergency room visit when she broke her wrist falling off playground equipment. The social services report noted my absence, marking me as unreliable. Mom had called 17 times while I was tracking down leads about Oscar's past. Emma asked why I wasn't there when she was scared, and I couldn't explain that I'd been trying to save our family's future while missing its present. My part-time job at the grocery store ended when I missed too many shifts. Meanwhile, Oscar used Grandpa's business accounts to upgrade shop equipment, posting photos of the improvements on Facebook. Local customers commented about how nice it was to see someone investing in Grandpa's legacy. Every improvement Oscar made with stolen money looked like progress to the community, while my life crumbled from pursuing justice. The confrontation at Grandpa's favorite restaurant happened during the lunch rush. Oscar was there with Michelle and some business associates, sitting at Grandpa's regular table. I walked in and stood beside their table, silently holding the medical records, showing the correlation between Oscar's visits and Grandpa's confusion episodes. The restaurant went quiet. Servers who'd known Grandpa for decades watched in horror as family drama played out in his sacred space. The owner asked me to leave. Regular customers shook their heads at the troubled kid disrupting a business. Lunch. Mom's job at the hospital became precarious. She made medication errors, missed meetings, cried in supply closets. Her supervisor suggested she take unpaid leave. Oscar's new girlfriend worked in hospital administration and made sympathetic comments about how difficult it must be to have a troubled son. Mom had to choose between supporting my investigation and keeping the job that paid our rent. She chose survival, begging me to stop before I destroyed what little we had left. I slept in my friend Marcus's garage after Dad changed the locks. He'd given me a key for emergencies, and this felt like one. Meanwhile, Oscar posted photos of Grandpa's newly renovated bedroom on Instagram, showing off the modern furniture and fresh paint. He'd erased every trace of Grandpa from the room where he'd slept for 40 years. Comments praised Oscar for updating the space while honoring Grandpa's memory. No one else saw it as erasure. Mom found me at Marcus's house and broke down completely. She held my face in her hands and begged me to let Grandpa rest in peace. She said I was destroying our family worse than Oscar ever could, that my obsession with justice was costing us everything. She'd aged 5 years and 5 months, her hair going gray, her hands shaking from exhaustion. She said if I loved Grandpa, I'd stop letting his death tear apart everyone he loved. My investigation into Oscar's finances accidentally destroyed an innocent family. I'd contacted a shop customer about irregular charges, trying to establish a pattern of Oscar's theft. The customer's wife saw my messages and assumed her husband was hiding financial problems. Their marriage was already strained from pandemic stress. My questions about unexplained shop visits triggered a massive fight about financial transparency. The husband lost a major contract when he missed a meeting during the argument. They filed for divorce 2 weeks later, citing financial deception and broken trust. The customer's 8-year-old son asked me why I'd made his parents fight. I couldn't explain that they were collateral damage in my war with Oscar. The boy's question haunted me. How many other lives was I disrupting? How many marriages, friendships, families would fracture because of my investigation? My last friend from school, Derek, asked the question I couldn't answer. What if Oscar really had loved Grandpa? What if their relationship was complicated, mixing genuine care with financial opportunity? What if Oscar convinced himself he deserved the inheritance? Derek wasn't taking sides, just pointing out that villains in real life rarely saw themselves as villains. I sat with that uncomfortable thought, unable to formulate a response. I made a calculated decision to publicly admit to taking money from the register, 5 here, 10 there, always intending to pay it back. I posted about it on Facebook, framing it as part of my commitment to total honesty in exposing Oscar's larger thefts. The admission backfired spectacularly. Oscar's lawyer used it to establish a pattern of theft in the family. Community. Members who'd been sympathetic now wondered if I was projecting my own guilt onto Oscar. The medical records revealed my greatest failure. Grandpa had tried to talk to me about his memory problems 3 separate times in his final year. Each time I'd been too busy, too focused on basketball or friends or my phone to really listen. He'd mentioned forgetting where he parked, losing track of conversations, finding himself in rooms without remembering why. I'd laughed it off, made jokes about senior moments, promised we'd talk later. Later never came, and Grandpa faced his declining mind alone. Oscar's lawyer filed an emergency motion to move the probate hearing up by 3 months. Our family lawyer was handling his father's hospitalization and couldn't prepare adequately. We'd have to go into the hearing with whatever evidence we had, ready or not. Oscar knew our position was weak and pressed his advantage. Time became our enemy as much as Oscar was. The revelation about Oscar's past came during an unguarded moment at the shop. While arguing about Grandpa's final wishes, Oscar let slip that his own family had disowned him for being gay 15 years ago. Grandpa had been the only father figure who'd accepted him unconditionally. Oscar's voice broke as he described Grandpa teaching him about engines, sharing army stories, treating him like the son his biological father rejected. The manipulation was real, but so was the pain behind it. Oscar's motivation revealed itself as a twisted mix of genuine grief and calculated opportunism. He'd loved Grandpa in his broken way, while simultaneously planning to take everything. He'd provided real comfort during Grandpa's confusion while documenting it for later use. He'd been both caregiver and predator, mixing authentic emotion with financial exploitation. The complexity made him harder to fight than a simple villain would have been. I crossed my final moral line when I used Emma's house key to search Michelle's home for evidence. Emma trusted me completely, had given me her spare key in case she ever got locked out. Using that trust to break into Michelle's house violated every principle Grandpa had taught me about family loyalty. But I did it anyway, searching through Michelle's files while she was at work, finding documents about Oscar's previous elderly client in Sacramento. The old version of me, who prioritized family bonds above all else, died in Michelle's home office. I emerged harder, more strategic, willing to sacrifice personal ethics for legal victory. Grandpa would have hated what I'd become, but Grandpa was gone and Oscar was still here, still stealing, still winning. The transformation felt like losing myself to save my family's legacy. The background check on Oscar revealed a pattern of elder financial abuse that made my stomach turn. The investigator Grandpa had used for insurance cases still had access to databases. She pulled records showing Oscar's involvement with 3 other elderly clients over 15 years. Each case followed the same pattern: befriend, isolate, manipulate during cognitive decline, inherit. Only one case had gone to trial, dismissed for insufficient evidence. Oscar had perfected his approach over years of practice. My minor victory felt hollow when I witnessed Oscar's genuine breakdown at Grandpa's grave. I'd gone to place flowers and found Oscar there, sobbing uncontrollably, talking to the headstone about letting Grandpa down. His grief was real, even if his methods were criminal. We stood on opposite sides of the grave, both crying for the man we'd lost, both claiming to be protecting his legacy. The shared moment of pain didn't erase what he'd done, but it complicated my hatred. Oscar's counterclaim for defamation gained traction as the judge reviewed the pattern of my behavior, breaking into properties, harassing family members, spreading accusations on social media, disrupting businesses, admitting to theft. My pursuit of justice looked like an escalating pattern of criminal behavior. Oscar's lawyer painted me as a disturbed teenager whose grandfather's death had triggered a breakdown. The legal system saw patterns, not truth. Everything came down to Carlos and his willingness to testify. He'd seen Oscar manipulating the books, overcharging customers, skimming cash, but testifying meant risking his unemployment benefits, his grandchildren's stability, his own reputation. I met with him one last time, showed him all the evidence, begged him to consider what Grandpa would have wanted. Carlos sat quietly, weighing 20 years of loyalty against his family's immediate needs. The community divided into factions as the hearing approached. Some believed my evidence of elder abuse. Others saw a grieving teenager lashing out. The shop's customers chose sides based on their own experiences with family conflict and loss. Oscar had successfully muddied the waters enough that truth became a matter of perspective rather than fact. My former kindness to Mrs. Chen paid off. She approached me at the grocery store, mentioning she'd been thinking about our conversations. She asked why I was being so mean to Oscar when he'd been nothing but helpful. But she said it with a knowing look, remembering what she'd told me about his late-night visits to Michelle's. She trusted my character from our interactions, even if she didn't understand the conflict. The high school split between teachers who believed in redemption and those who demanded accountability. My English teacher argued that grief could make good people do terrible things. My history teacher countered that actions had consequences regardless of emotional state. The debate played out in faculty meetings with my future hanging in the balance of their philosophical differences. The family court system revealed its limitations when I tried to present evidence of financial elder abuse. The mediator explained, that family court was designed for clear-cut physical abuse or neglect, not complex financial manipulation. The burden of proof for financial abuse was extraordinarily high, requiring documentation that confused elderly people rarely maintained. The system protected obvious victims but struggled with sophisticated predators like Oscar, who operated in legal gray areas. I reached out to Grandpa's Vietnam War buddy, Eddie, who owed Grandpa his life. Eddie wanted to help, but was battling his own health issues. He could provide some assistance through VA connections, but couldn't risk his disability benefits with full involvement. He gave me one crucial piece of information. Grandpa had known about Oscar's manipulation for months, but chose to endure it rather than burden the family with an ugly legal battle. The revelation reframed Grandpa's final months as a conscious sacrifice. He'd known Oscar was taking advantage, but believed fighting it would destroy the family. He documented what he could while maintaining family peace. His silence wasn't confusion, but protection, choosing to absorb the abuse rather than watch his children tear each other apart. The nobility of his choice made our current conflict even more tragic. Eddie's information changed everything. The combination for Grandpa's hidden safe was his unit number from Vietnam, followed by his service dates. I found the safe behind a false panel in his workshop at 3 a.m., my hands trembling as I entered the numbers Eddie had given me. Inside were stacks of handwritten notes documenting Oscar's visits, medication schedules, and Grandpa's growing awareness of his own confusion. The most devastating discovery was a letter addressed to Dad, explaining why Grandpa chose silence over confrontation. The letter detailed how Grandpa noticed Oscar's interest in the shop finances months before the will signing. He'd watched Oscar study the books, ask probing questions about assets, befriend Michelle with calculated precision. Grandpa knew what was coming, but felt trapped between his failing mind and his desire to protect the family from an ugly legal battle. He'd chosen to document everything secretly while letting Oscar believe he was succeeding. I photocopied every document before returning the originals to the safe. The evidence was overwhelming, but heartbreaking. Grandpa's handwriting deteriorated page by page, his observations becoming less coherent, even as he desperately tried to record Oscar's manipulation. The final entries were barely legible, just fragments about protecting Tony and keeping the family together. Oscar's overconfidence finally created the opening I needed. During a meeting with the family lawyer about estate distribution, Oscar contradicted his earlier sworn statements about the will signing. He claimed he'd been present the entire time, forgetting he'd previously stated he'd stepped out to take a phone call. The lawyer's expression shifted subtly as he made notes. The bank manager, who'd been pushing for Oscar's cooperation, discovered irregularities in the signature cards. 3 different versions of Grandpa's signature appeared on documents dated within the same week. The manager faced potential liability for accepting fraudulent documents. His self-preservation instinct kicked in. I organized the evidence methodically, creating a timeline that showed Oscar's visits correlating with Grandpa's documented confusion periods. Patricia's medical records proved invaluable, showing exact medication times and Oscar's uncanny ability to appear during peak impairment. The pattern was undeniable when laid out chronologically. The courthouse waiting room on the morning of the probate hearing felt like a battlefield. Oscar's supporters clustered on one side, my few remaining allies on the other. Empty chairs between the groups marked the community's division. Mrs. Chen sat alone in the middle, having chosen neutrality. Her presence meant more than any vocal support. Oscar's physical deterioration showed in his appearance. His eye developed a persistent twitch whenever someone mentioned Grandpa. His hands shook as he organized his papers. The confident manipulator who'd orchestrated months of deception was cracking under the pressure. My own body betrayed my stress through a tremor in my right hand that wouldn't stop. Months of sleepless nights and constant vigilance had taken their toll, but I forced myself to remain calm, presenting each piece of evidence without emotional outbursts. Grandpa had taught me that facts spoke louder than feelings. The medical expert's testimony proved devastating for Oscar's case. She explained how Grandpa's specific medication regimen created predictable windows of confusion. The will signing occurred during a documented impairment period, confirmed by pharmacy records and medical observations. Her clinical assessment stripped away any ambiguity about Grandpa's mental state during crucial moments. Oscar's complete breakdown came when confronted with the evidence from Grandpa's safe. His carefully constructed narrative collapsed as he realized Grandpa had been documenting everything. Oscar's sobs were genuine as he admitted believing Grandpa wanted him as the true heir, that their bond transcended blood relations. His delusion ran so deep he convinced himself the manipulation was actually fulfilling Grandpa's wishes. The judge ordered a thorough investigation of Oscar's financial history with elderly clients. The pattern from Sacramento and other cases established clear predatory behavior, but the investigation also revealed Oscar's complex psychology, mixing genuine attachment with opportunistic exploitation. He wasn't a simple villain, but a damaged person who'd turned his need for belonging into a pattern of elder abuse. When offered the chance to influence Oscar's sentencing recommendations, I thought about what Grandpa would want. Despite everything, Grandpa had cared about Oscar, had seen something worth saving in him. I recommended mandatory therapy and supervised community service with legitimate elder care organizations. Punishment alone wouldn't honor Grandpa's compassionate nature. The shop returned to our family's control after months of legal procedures. Oscar's debts from his improvements became his sole responsibility. The business accounts were restored, though depleted. Dad could finally access his own family's legacy. Carlos returned to work, his loyalty rewarded. He brought other mechanics who'd left during Oscar's reign. The shop slowly began to feel familiar again, though the scars of division remained visible. The community's permanent fracture became evident. Some customers returned immediately, loyal to our family. Others stayed away, unable to reconcile their sympathy for Oscar with proven abuse. The hardware store owner who'd believed Oscar's lies couldn't meet my eyes. Mom's relationship with her hospital supervisors required delicate rebuilding. Her performance improved, but trust recovered slowly. She'd aged visibly, carrying the weight of choosing survival. Dad and I worked together on the Mustang in silence most evenings. The restoration became our way of processing everything. Each replaced part, each hour spent side by side slowly mended what had broken. Some nights he'd share a memory of Grandpa, and I'd understand we were finding our way back. Emma's trust proved harder to rebuild. She genuinely cared about Oscar, and learning about his manipulation confused her young heart. I helped with her homework, drove her to school, trying to show through consistent actions that I was still the cousin who'd always protected her. Michelle disappeared after the hearing, selling her house and leaving town. Her betrayal cut too deep for reconciliation. Some family bonds, once severed, couldn't be restored. The shop implemented new financial protections. Every transaction required documentation. Every decision needed multiple signatures. Grandpa's trust had been beautiful but naive. We couldn't afford such innocence anymore. I returned to school, but found myself fundamentally changed. My classmates' concerns seemed trivial after months of fighting for my family's survival. Teachers noted my improved focus, Not understanding it came from learning what truly mattered. Basketball held no appeal anymore. The Mustang's restoration neared completion. Dad and I installed the last original parts Grandpa had collected. The car represented everything we'd fought to preserve, everything Oscar had tried to steal. Its gleaming paint reflected not just Grandpa's dream, but our family's resilience. Oscar served his sentence through community service and therapy. I saw him once at the grocery store, looking smaller, his confidence replaced by humility. We didn't speak, but his nod acknowledged what had passed between us. The war was over, even if peace remained elusive. The shop's grand reopening drew a modest crowd, not the whole community, but enough to show we'd survived. Dad hung Grandpa's photo in the office, a reminder of the man who'd built everything. We'd nearly lost. Carlos rang up the first customer while I organized tools exactly as Grandpa had taught me. Some relationships never recovered. Jake's family maintained their distance. My former basketball coach avoided me. The social fabric of our small town had been rewoven with visible seams. But other connections strengthened. Patricia became a regular at family dinners, her loyalty earning her a permanent place. Mrs. Chen brought flowers, her quiet support meaning more than grand gestures. The investigation brought financial restitution, but not emotional closure. Grandpa's suffering couldn't be undone, and the family's fractures would never fully heal. Justice existed in legal terms, but the personal cost exceeded any courtroom victory. I spent evenings in the shop after closing, sitting in the Mustang and talking to Grandpa's memory. I told him about the fight, the cost, the things I'd done that would have disappointed him. But I also told him about preserving his legacy, protecting Dad, keeping the family business alive. The Mustang's engine purred to life perfectly now, every component restored with painstaking care. Dad and I took it for drives on Sunday mornings, following the routes Grandpa had loved. Neither of us spoke, but the shared silence held more healing than any words could provide. The shop thrived under Dad's renewed leadership. He implemented Grandpa's vision while adapting to modern needs. Oscar's expensive improvements, ironically, helped attract new customers. We succeeded, despite Oscar, not because of him. My transformation from a naive teenager to someone harder and more strategic felt permanent. The innocence that had let me trust family implicitly died during those months. But Grandpa's core values survived. Loyalty to those who earned it, compassion even for those who'd wronged us, and the quiet strength to endure whatever came next. The 1967 Mustang sat polished and perfect in the shop's showroom, a memorial to Grandpa's love and dreams. Customers often asked if it was for sale. Dad and I would share a look and explain it wasn't just a car, but a reminder of what we'd nearly lost and fought to reclaim. The Mustang would never be sold. It would remain where Grandpa intended, a symbol of family legacy preserved through sacrifice and determination.